Operation Dragoon was the codename for the Allied invasion of southern France, which took place on 15 August 1944, during World War II. The invasion was initiated via a parachute drop by the 1st Airborne Task Force, followed by an amphibious assault by elements of the U.S.Seventh Army, followed a day later by a force made up primarily of the French First Army. The landing caused the German Army Group G to abandon southern France and to retreat under constant Allied attacks to the Vosges Mountains. Despite being a large and complex military operation with a well-executed amphibious and airborne component, Operation Dragoon is not well known as it was overshadowed by the larger Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy, which occurred over 2 months earlier. Background. Prelude. During planning stages, the 1942 operation was known as Anvil, to complement Operation Sledgehammer, at the time the code name for the invasion of Normandy. Subsequently, both plans were renamed, Sledgehammer becoming Operation Overlord, and Anvil becoming Operation Dragoon. An apocryphal story holds that the name was chosen by the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who was opposed to the plan and claimed to having been dragooned into accepting it. Other accounts attest that the operation was named after Dragoon, a city near the invasion site. The original idea of an invasion of southern France had come from General George Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, in 1942, and at the Dragoon Conference in late 1943 Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, supported the idea as proposed by the U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, in preference to having his Western allies near the Balkans as he considered it his zone of influence. Marshall insisted that it be included in the strategic planning. Thereafter, Roosevelt found it unpalatable to cancel the operation. Operation Dragoon was controversial from the time it was first proposed. The American military leadership and its British counterparts disagreed on the operation. Churchill argued against it on the grounds that it diverted military resources that were better deployed for Allied operations in Italy. Instead, he favored an invasion of the oil-producing regions of the Balkans. Churchill reasoned that by attacking the Balkans, the Western Allies could deny Germany petroleum, forestall the advance of the Red Army of the Soviet Union, and achieve a superior negotiating position in post-war Europe, all at his stroke. Every time the proposal was made to drop Dragoon, the French leaders outside France who were in the know were up in arms, declaring it was an affront to France if the operation was considered a strategic irrelevance, and insisting French soldiers must be used in the assault. When first planned, the landings in France were to be simultaneous with Overlord in Normandy and Anvil in the south of France. The expansion of Overlord from a 3 to a 5-division front required many additional LSDs. It became impossible to do the landings simultaneously, resulted in the postponing of Anvil by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander. Finally, on 14 July 1944, the operation was authorized by the Allied Combined Chiefs of Staff. The operation was renamed Dragoon on 1 August. The landing was scheduled for 15 August. Planning. Force 163, planners for the operation, set the priorities for Dragoon. The chief objective was the capture of the important French ports of Marseille and Toulon, which were considered as essential to supply the growing Allied forces in France. The Allied planners were cautious. They used lessons learned from the Anzio and Normandy landings. They chose a location without high ground controlled by the Wehrmacht. as such conditions had forced them to incur heavy casualties after the initial landings on one of the beaches at Normandy. The choice was an area at the Var coast east of Toulon as the disembarkation site. An earlier air campaign was planned to isolate the battlefield and cut the Germans off from reinforcement by destroying several key bridges. Also, a large airborne landing was planned in the center of the landing zone to quickly seize the high ground overlooking the beaches. Parallel to the invasion, several commando units would seize the islands off the coast. Opposing them would be Army Group G, responsible for southwest France to Italy. The Atlantic Coast sector, which was 857 kilometers, had just 2 infantry divisions. The remaining 650 kilometers of coast along the Mediterranean had 7 divisions with 1 armored division held in reserve. Although the Germans expected another Allied landing in the Mediterranean or northern Italy or in the Adriatic, the massive threat from the advancing Red Army, the Allied landings in Normandy and conflicts in Yugoslavia all required all German resources. So little could be done to improve the condition of Army Group G. In fact, many units had been stripped from Army Group G since the 6th of June. The original concept and reason for Dragoon was to tie down German units so they could not be sent to Normandy. 13 divisions, including 6 panzer divisions, had already been redeployed before the 15th of August. The invasion could therefore be considered a failure before it even started. The original concept had envisaged a 2-division assault. This had now been increased to 3 by sea and 1 by air, with enough shipping to deliver 50,000–60,000 troops and 6,500 vehicles within 24 hours. The landing force at the end of D-Day would be twice the size of Army Group G troops, in the concentrated small area of the massive German front line, although a further 200,000 German troops were within 2 days' march. By D+30 it was expected to have 366,833 men and 20,031 vehicles ashore. Opposing forces. The Western Naval Task Force was formed under the command of Vice Admiral Henry Kent Hewitt to carry the U.S.Sixth Army Group, also known as the Southern Group and as Dragoon Force, and created to carry out the operation under the command of Lieutenant General Jacob L. Devers. Sixth Army Group was formed in Corsica and activated on 1 August 1944, to consolidate the French and American forces slated to invade southern France. Admiral Hewitt's naval support for the operation included US Nevada, US Texas, US Arkansas, HMS Ramillies and French battleship Lorraine, with 20 cruisers for gunfire support and naval aircraft from 9 escort carriers assembled as Task Force 88. It was planned that the forces of the U.S.Seventh Army, commanded by Alexander Patch, would make the initial landing, to be followed by the French Army-B commanded by Jean de Lattre de Tassigny. Accompanying the operation was a fully mobilized unit called Task Force Butler, consisting of the bulk of the Allied tanks, tank destroyers and mechanized infantry. In addition, the French resistance, including the FFI, played a major role in fighting, tying down numerous German troops in the small inland garrisons. US operational groups and French resistance fighters had also supplied the Allies with vital intelligence information and sabotaged German operations. In conjunction with the amphibious landing, several airborne operations were planned, conducted by a combined U.S. British airborne unit, the 1st Airborne Task Force, codenamed Operation Rugby. Opposing the Allies was the German Army Group G. Although nominally an Army Group G had at the time of the invasion only one army under its command, the 19th Army, under the command of Friedrich Wieser. As southern France had never been important to German planning, the forces that had been stripped of nearly all the valuable units and equipment over the course of the war. The remaining 11 divisions were under strength and only one intact panzer division was left, the 11th Panzer Division, which also had lost 2 of its tank battalions. The troops were positioned thinly along the French coast, with an average of 90 kilometers per division. Generally, the troops of the German divisions were only second and third grade. This meant that over the course of the years, Germans in those divisions were sent away and replaced with wounded old veterans as well as Volksdeutsche from Poland and Czechoslovakia. There were numerous Ostlegionen inserted, as well as several units made up from volunteers Soviet prisoners of war. The equipment of those troops was in poor shape, consisting of old weapons from various nations, with French, Polish, Soviet, Italian and Czech guns, artillery and mortars. 4 of the German divisions were designated as static, which meant that they were stripped of all of the mobile capabilities and unable to move from the position. The only potent unit inside Army Group G was the 11th Panzer Division, which was commanded by Wendt von Wietersheim. The German chain of command was overly complex, with parallel chains for the occupation forces, the land forces, Luftwaffe and the Kriegsmarine commands. As part of the defense, the Germans had several fortifications and coastal guns, many of which were French-constructed. The Luftwaffe, with 200 aircraft as well as the Kriegsmarine, with 45 small ships, would play a negligible role in the operation. Given the size of the Allied forces in northern France, the Germans deemed a realistic defense in the south impossible. Blaskowitz's Army Group G headquarters discussed a general withdrawal from southern France in July with the German High Command, but the 20th of July plot led to an atmosphere in which any withdrawal was out of the question. Blaskowitz was quite aware that with his scattered forces, any serious Allied landing attempt would be impossible to ward off. He planned the withdrawal in secret, to include demolition of the ports and conduct an ordered withdrawal, covered by the 11th Panzer Division. He intended to establish a new defense line centered on Dijon in central France. German intelligence was aware of the impending Allied landing, and on the 13th of August Blaskowitz ordered the 11th Panzer Division to move east of the Rhone River, where the landing was expected.